In 2005, Bret Hart and Vince McMahon decided to put their differences aside and work together on a DVD set celebrating the Hitman's legendary career. Hitting shelves on November 15th of that year, the 3-disc Bret Hart, The Best There Is, The Best There Was, The Best There Ever Will Be marked the first time Bret had appeared on camera in anything related to WWE since the 1997 Survivor Series, when Hart's time in the company came to a notorious end with the Montreal Screwjob. Though the piece that was ultimately released was a glowing retrospective of an all-time great, it was originally going to be anything but. WWE filmed material for an alternative DVD set to be called Screwed, the Bret Hart story, but that project ended up never seeing the light of day. What exactly would Screwed have been? Why was it made? Why was it shelved? And will we ever get to watch this piece of lost wrestling media? Bret Hart had a great WWE career, working for the company from August 1984 until that fateful night in Montreal on November 9th, 1997. A hard-working and loyal soldier who was in the trenches during some tough times, the excellence of execution worked his way up the card and went from tag team specialist to single star, winning the Intercontinental title twice and the WWE World title 5 times. After the Screwjob went down, Bret went to work for WCW. His career ended for good, however, in early 2000 after Hart suffered a number of concussions following an errant kick thrown by Goldberg in their WCW title main event at Starrcade 1999. Though on the outs with WWE during that time, Bret did meet with Vince McMahon in secret in a Calgary park around the time of Owen Hart's funeral in May of 1999. Regarding that meeting, Vince told Michael Landsberg during an appearance on TSN's Off the Record not long after, Bret carried the entire conversation. I really thought he wanted to talk about Owen. He mentioned Owen in one sentence and the rest of it was about Bret. All he wanted to talk about was himself, nothing to do with his brother. It was like looking into the eyes of a skeleton in some respects. It seemed like he wasn't human. It was a very weird experience. Of course, Bret was legally unable to talk about Owen due to pending legal action, and McMahon was very well aware of that. But don't let the truth get in the way of good lie or anything, Vince, eh? WWE continued to take shots at Hart in the coming years, whether it was repeatedly replicating the Montreal Screwjob as a match finish, including once in front of Bret's father Stu, who was sitting in the front row, or mocking his exit in the Lonely Road of Faith Desire video. Bret, for his part, also continued to bash the company in interviews and through his regular column in the Calgary Sun newspaper. Then, on May 25th, 2002, the new kayfabe-breaking behind-the-scenes show, WWE Confidential, premiered. The first episode mostly focused on Shawn Michaels, who was preparing for an in-ring return after a 4-year absence. Naturally, the topic of the Montreal Screwjob came up, with Michaels, McMahon, and fellow conspirator Gerald Briscoe giving their thoughts and opinions on the situation. It was the first time that the Heartbreak Kid had admitted having prior knowledge to what was about to happen, having vigorously denied it since it all went down. That confidential piece almost looks like a sneak peek at what Screwed might have been, with Shawn and everyone involved in the deed portrayed as the gutsy heroes, whilst Bret was the ingrate refusing to follow with the time-honoured tradition of the business. In another episode of Confidential focused on the death of WCW, Hulk Hogan tried to blame the fall of that multi-million-dollar company on Bret's WCW contract. Even for a bollock spewer like the Hulkster, that was something else, brother. But what was clear was that the company had no time for the Hitman and would take any opportunity to disparage his name and reputation. Then, just weeks after the Montreal Screwjob episode of Confidential aired, Bret Hart suffered a stroke after taking a bad fall while out riding his bicycle. It was a serious situation and Bret was in a bad way. One of the first people to reach out to him by phone while he was recovering in the hospital was his former boss. Bret has described getting the call from Vince, who basically gave him an inspiring pep talk and told him that he would recover from it. The two also discussed working on a project celebrating Hart's career. For years, even before leaving in one of the worst ways possible, Bret had discussed such a project, originally intended to be a VHS or series of VHS releases of his best matches, but now would much more likely be a multi-disc DVD. Hart had always wanted to be remembered for the positive contributions he'd made to the business. The DVD set was further inspired by a young fan that Bret met in the dentist's office who had a Bret Hart action figure, but had never actually seen any of Bret's matches and only knew him from video games. Speaking to New Zealand pro wrestling news site NJPW in May of 2003, Bret had this to say about the mooted compilation. "I always told Vince McMahon that I wanted to be remembered and respected for what I contributed. He understood that. I think we have an understanding and something's going to be in the works there, but I've learned that sometimes what people say, unless you have it written down, people have a way of forgetting what they promised." Ah, Bret, mate, you have no idea. There wasn't much progress on the project in the 2 years that followed, though WWE did try and tempt Bret into making an appearance at WrestleMania 20, which he declined. Then, at some point in the spring of 2005, Vince called the Hitman and told him that they were going to release a DVD called Screwed, the Bret Hart story. The company were already planning to release The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, which not only detailed the trials and tribulations of Jim Hellwig's alter ego, but featured many of his former co-workers trashing not just the character and his career, but the man himself. That DVD would result in subsequent legal action and more bitter feelings between Warrior and WWE, something that would persist for close to a decade after. Bret, when talking about the similarities between Screwed and the Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, said that he felt it was hard to feel sympathy for Hellwig as a person, but that he deserved better than what he got and was entitled to his fair place in wrestling history. When Bret heard of Vince's plan, he kindly reminded the WWE chairman that this wasn't what they had discussed when it came to chronicling Hart's career, and that they should do something a little bit more positive. According to Bret, when Vince had pitched Screwed, he was laughing on the phone, which upset the Pink and Black attack. When Bret countered that he was promised something more dignified than a documentary predominantly focused on the events of Montreal, Vince did a total 180 and told Bret he could basically be in charge of the thing and have creative control of it. What Bret didn't know, but would soon find out, was that Screwed had already been filmed and was, in fact, nearly complete. Speaking with British newspaper The Sun, while promoting the Best There Is, Best There Was, and Best There Ever Will Be, Hart mentioned that what he had seen wasn't very good and not something his fans would ever want to watch. Per Bret, it featured a lot of people he had personal beefs with. Michaels, Hulk Hogan, and Jerry Lawler were named, slagging him off and calling him a bad businessman and overrated wrestler. Hart has since patched things up with Michaels and Lawler, but at the time they were absolutely towing the company line when it came to their Bret bashing. So Bret came on board and got heavily involved in putting the DVD together. Gone were Michaels, Lawler, and Hogan. In were Bret allies like Steve Austin, Chris Benoit, and Roddy Piper. Bret also chose the matches and made editorial decisions about how things like the Screwjob and Owen's death would be handled. The finished project was a triumph, the first of many such sets dedicated to Bret's career. Before the documentary portion plays, Vince McMahon gives a short address thanking Bret for putting aside their differences in order to make the DVD a reality. Bret would later say during an appearance on WWE's internet show Bite This that Vince bent over backwards to make sure that things were done right with the DVD and he appreciated the effort. Hart did also say that he felt Screwed was a way to strong-arm him into coming back and working with WWE. Regardless of how and why it happened, it was the first major step in the ice thawing and led to Bret being inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in April of 2006. So, what happened to the original product? Does Screwed, the Bret Hart story, actually exist? And will it ever be seen? Since WWE likes to have a copy of everything they ever do, odds are the footage is sitting in an archive or warehouse somewhere. There's really no reason for it to be seen, since WWE and Hart are on much better terms these days, and the Hitman's legend has only grown in recent years. Besides, the world has enough video evidence of Hulk Hogan being a massive bellend and talking out of his arse. Don't you think? Bye!